Hello and welcome to the Morningscape Podcast. I am Matt Moody, running it solo style for this Thursday, October 25th, NHL DFS slate. Before we get into some of the specifics of this daily fantasy slate, DJ went ahead and brought you guys an interview with Just Dish and Hockey, a brand that we are going to partner with at the Morningscape Podcast to produce, yes, you guessed it, the t-shirts. There will be more details to come, some of which DJ will touch on. But yes, so that's what we're going to lead with. A pretty cool opportunity for us at the Morningscape Pod. Really looking forward to what we're doing at Just Dishin. But yeah, so just before we get to tonight's NHL DFS action, you're going to be looking at about 10 minutes. Really cool guy that DJ managed to sit down with to talk about their company, what they do, and how how any hockey fan should really be interested in what they do, just from a clothing lifestyle sort of perspective. So I will let DJ introduce that to you guys, and then we will regroup for tonight's slate. And if you'd like to skip right to the beginning of the pod, it should be about at the 13 or 14-minute mark. I'll be sure to note it in the show notes if you're looking to just get to the DFS action and want to listen to some of the more macro level stuff at the Morningscape pod, maybe a little bit later on in your workday or whatever. So just be sure to check the show notes. I'll have the exact time of when I do a kind of brief breakdown of the slate. But yeah, so be sure to, if you're not interested, to go ahead and look for that timestamp. All right, and thank you to DJ and Nick from Justician for handling that. I was checking out some of the stuff that Nick was talking about on the pod. By the way, I might have said Matt earlier. I actually I played like hockey growing up with Matt Keeler, the founder of Justician. We definitely fell out of touch over the years, but pretty cool. Seeing a kid, I knew back when we were 11, 12, doing pretty cool things in the hockey space. He did mention like they've partnered with a bunch of players, including Jackie Greco from the Buttes, who's like an incredible player. They've got some Sabres like Justin Bailey. I know Nick Baptiste just got traded. Jason Woolley for you old timers. He might ring a bell. Brendan Gooley, up and comer. Cliff Poo, I think he got moved in the Skinner deal. And then a couple of other guys across the NHL, Ryan Hartman and Josh Hosang, along with Dylan Strome. Probably some of the more high level, I guess endorsements they've gotten. Not exactly sure what he referred to them as on the interview, but just really cool stuff going on over there. I'm definitely picking up one of those tandem bike shirts that he was talking about. That is incredible. $15. I named my fantasy hockey team after them this year, the Samson's tandem bike. So really looking forward to kind of supporting my fantasy boys with such a cool shirt like that. So thank you to Justician, Nick, and DJ for handling that interview while I was busy grinding the 9 to 5, working overtime. So let's get into Thursday night's action. We've got a 10-game slate ahead of us. Nothing too crazy. 10K to first for the $8. Just your run of the mill 10K. So let's take a stab at some of that money. What do you say? All right, 10 games. We'll start with Nashville at New Jersey, Montreal at Buffalo, Philly at Boston, LA at Minnesota, Columbus at St. Louis, Anaheim at Dallas, Rangers at Chicago, Washington at Edmonton after maybe the game of the year between Pittsburgh and Edmonton on Tuesday night. That was a ton of fun, I think, regardless of what your rooting interest was, whether it was for a team or for your fantasy lineup or against that game for fantasy purposes. Obviously, you got burned in that latter group, but that game was just so much fun to watch. I find it really tough to be upset about the way that game ended. Pittsburgh continuing their Western Canada swing at Calgary, and then Vancouver playing on a road back-to-back at Arizona. That could be an interesting spot to watch. We saw Arizona go into Columbus and relatively, unexpectedly just thumped the Blue Jackets. So obviously they head back home. They get a tired Vancouver team. Looks like Vancouver will be without Besser, Pettersson. Both those guys could play, but they seem pretty doubtful, along with Alex Edler, who left Wednesday night's game and will not return. So I find him pretty doubtful as well. So I guess to wrap up the news and notes that are, more macro level, well, actually, I think we'll just touch on the rest while when we get to it. But we're looking at some Vegas lines preliminary on Wednesday night. Montreal and Buffalo, along with LA, Minnesota, are the two 5.5s on the slate. Anaheim, Dallas, and Vancouver, Arizona do not have over-unders pegged. I find it hard to believe that these games aren't 6s. Maybe Vancouver, Arizona is a 5.5. And then every other game is a 6. The over is favored on Washington, Edmonton. And then Pittsburgh, Calgary is actually a 6.5. So we'll talk about some really intriguing notes in that game. So let's get right to it. We're going to still go tier by tier through the positions. I personally feel like that's a better way to kind of digest the information rather than going game by game saying, hey, Philly, they're all good plays. Boston, very good plays. Yeah, Buffalo, nah, but you can play Eichel. Like, that's not really, I think, all that useful to someone who's trying to really understand the slate for, who the values are, where the value is, what sort of lineups you can build. Just because I think going game by game gives you more of a, hey, here's some notes, but good luck figuring out the rest. So I think looking at it more focused on salary and really digging into what makes a value on these slates is more useful, to my interpretation of it. So if you guys feel differently, be sure to let us know on Twitter at MorningsGatePod or in the GroupMe if you're a part of that. And if you are not part of the GroupMe, that's something you can join by following us on Twitter at MorningsGatePod and then DMing us. So, a lot of ways to get in contact with us, obviously, but if this is something you feel strongly about, we'd love to know what your preference is in terms of, what vehicle you want this information in, because obviously DJ and I have no problem tackling a slate no matter what, kind of angle we look at it from. With that said, let's start at the center position. We're looking at McDavid, Bergeron, Seguin, pretty much the class of the center position here. Not too much of a surprise. Interestingly, Sidney Crosby is center 9 on this slate. And, I don't know. Center 8 because I can't count. But, I mean, we saw what he did against Edmonton. This is, again, pegged as the highest over-under game of the night. I don't blame you if you go right back to the well, play Crosby at 6.7. He's less expensive than guys like Zibanejad, who if you're a longtime listener, obviously we love Mika Zibanejad on this show, but I don't know if he's that valuable DFS asset. Maybe you can argue the matchup against Chicago is, puts him into that elite tier of center, but his price is certainly, right up there with the guys, especially in tournaments. You need multiple points for them to, really make a run in these tournaments, and even, to not fall behind in cash games. Like, obviously you can make it up if a guy like Sagan goes for an assist and 4 shots, but it's pretty tough to, give up 5-6 points versus the highest center, and they're all likely to be relatively high owned. So personally, I think it's got to be McDavid. 7.9 versus Bergeron and Sagan here. Like, Sagan maybe at 7.6. We saw the last time Anaheim played in Dallas. They put up the illustrious 30 shots in the second period against the Ducks. So, certainly that could happen again. Sagan in that game ended up going for 9 DK points. He had 9 shots on goal with 2 assists. Might actually have been, a relatively disappointing 9 fantasy point game based on the fact he had 9 shots on goal, didn't score a single one of them. But I just think McDavid is he just changes the game every single game he plays in. Last time out, he had 8 shots on goal in that Pittsburgh game. Like, he is all over the ice. Kind of underrated is that the Edmonton power play has been awesome this year, and that McDavid's 5-on-5 numbers are actually like relatively low. He's actually kind of getting unlucky at 5-on-5. So, there's a ton of meat left on the bone for McDavid still, even though he's been putting up ridiculous fantasy nights. Him and his line mates, Nugent Hopkins is about the same price as he's been. Clefbaum's been priced up a little bit, as has Yamamoto, so not quite as cash locky, especially on Clefbaum, as they were before. So, McDavid's certainly a great way to get McDavid exposure if that's what you're trying to do. I'm not going to talk too much about Eichel because I just don't think that he's at that point, especially playing on the line with Jeff Skinner, who's not afraid to shoot the puck either. I think they're great in tournaments. You look at Eichel's game logs, he has 1 game this season with 3 shots on goal. Every other game he's been at 4 or more. So you're certainly getting a safe floor, but I don't think 6,900 is the best price. Also want to note that my dad will be in attendance at the Sabres game, and I'm pretty sure over the last 2 years he has been at like more than half of, I should say, they pretty much lose every time he goes to the games, and he doesn't go to that many games. And he's probably seen more losses than just about any season ticket holder that, hasn't gone to every game in the Sabres schedule. Like, it's just ridiculous. I feel so bad for the guy. But, it's one of those things you got to keep in mind when making your DFS teams, because clearly he has some sort of hex he puts on the Sabres when he goes. So, yeah, going down the list a bit at center, I mentioned the Elias Pettersson news. Even if he does play, 6,400 is an absolute bonkers price. I don't see that being a great play. Bo Horvat might get a little buzz because he just scored 2 goals against the Knights on Wednesday night. Again, not doing that. If I'm going down in this range, I'm going to a guy like a Sean Couturier, even a Pierre-Luc Dubois or Ryan Getzlaf. Like, these 5K centers, I think there's a lot there. And then my 2 favorites here are Nico Hischier and Jeff Carter. Nico Hischier, just because he's been playing such a dynamic role for the Devils, with Nashville has him priced down at 4,800, whereas his line mates in Taylor Hall and Kyle Palmieri are still above 7K. Obviously you're leaving a few shots on the table by taking Hischier over one of those 2, but you get an awesome amount of exposure to them at 5-on-5 and on the power play. And to me, I don't think that a matchup of Nashville is worth pricing Hischier down. A solid $600-700 of what I think his price really should be in a, ideal. If I were setting the prices in a neutral matchup, I think for Hischier. But Jeff Carter at 4,700, even in this relatively down-paced affair, it seems like at the beginning of the season, the Kings just weren't using him all too well. Like, they were kind of putting him on like the secondary power play units. and they struggled. And so, as of late, they've put him back on the first unit. He's actually playing at 5-on-5 with Ilya Kovalchuk. Um, so I really like that. Even as a mini stack, I don't think that LA scores 3 to 4 goals, but I think that when they do score, Carter and Kovalchuk will likely be a part of it. And at their prices, it certainly is worth taking a shot on a guy like Dubnyk, blowing a tire, having a rough night, and um, Minnesota gives up shots. They don't necessarily give up dangerous chances, but you'll get the shots on goal, and you don't need a whole lot of that. Jeff Carter, 4,700, playing about 18 minutes a night, 20 minutes to get value. Going a bit further down the list, we have a red hot Jason Spezza, 4,200. Gets you first power play exposure to Dallas. Tyler Pitlick, I guess more of a group me favorite because we didn't have the news until Tuesday afternoon or Tuesday morning. But Tyler Pitlick is also on that first power play for the Dallas Stars. But he's been priced up to 4K playing alongside Ben and Sagan on both the power play and 5-on-5. So, we'll talk about him, but I think that it's a relatively decent play. But for me, Spetz is a relatively decent play. For me, the play down here at the center position is Nolan Patrick, 3,600. There's actually a Philly value that I like even more than Patrick coming up. However, I think 3,600 for this guy is kind of ridiculous. He's come back, and it doesn't hurt that he scored twice in the 2 games since his return from injury. But he's playing, 16, 17 minutes a night. We saw last year he's a relatively good rate shooter. And so I think that as he finds his game, especially against these Boston depth guys, missing Charlie McAvoy in all likelihood, missing Torrey Krug, they're not probably missing Vakanainen, the guy who was basically called up to replace McAvoy. Any of those things could change, but Boston is certainly banged up, and I do not mind getting a piece of Patrick at 3.6. Last game he was playing with Jake Voracek, so you're getting great Voracek exposure there, and second power play time for Patrick, which is also a pretty good thing. There's an outside chance that he replaces Wayne Simmons on the first power play as well, as we saw at the end of last year. So I wouldn't expect that until we see it actually happen. But a 3.6 I think for Patrick is just a little bit too low, and so I like him if you're just trying to punt center. And then the ultimate punt at center is actually a guy I mentioned last show and kind of came off of after we saw some of the lines, but it's Sam Steele for Anaheim. He's still playing on the first power play unit. He's only 2.6 on this slate. It's a matchup against Dallas. We saw them the last time kind of get run out of the building after a strong first period, but Steele last game, again, played on that first power play unit with Fowler, Getzlaf, Henrique, Raquel. So really the only danger to his spot there is it's basically Ryan Kessler. It's not a sure thing that Steele stays on that first unit, obviously, but where he's playing is more of the Jakob Silfverberg role, more so than it is like a net front a net front role for them. So I could see Steele, still staying on that first power play, playing a decent amount of 5-on-5 minutes. I would say it's more of a third line role than anything else, but for 2.6, you don't need a whole lot, and you can obviously open up a ton of room that way. So if the center position covered at the wing, yes, we have a guy, honestly, more expensive than Alex Ovechkin yet again. David Pastrnak, 8.1 versus Ovechkin at 8K. Pastrnak, again, at home versus Philly. He's over a goal per game at this point. 10 goals in his first 9 games. He's shooting the puck a ton. 38 shots in 9 games, so over 4 shots per game. If you want to bet on it continuing, by all means, go for it. But for me, I'm going to take the guy who's done it, night in, night out for a decade now in Ovechkin. This guy is sitting at 8 goals in 8 games with more shots per game than Pastrnak. Definitely more of the offense is filtered through Ovechkin than it is Pastrnak. You can say Pasternak's more dynamic or whatever, but there's nobody in the league like Ovi who just sits in that one spot and has 2 guys in Backstrom and Kuznetsov feeding him on the power play. Like, it's just an incredible, it's a thing of beauty. And so I don't really see a reason to pay for Pastrnak over Ovechkin personally. And we're getting a matchup against Edmonton versus a Philly team that I actually think is bound for some, I think defensive improvements. I could be way off base there, but their expected goals numbers actually aren't that bad to begin the season. So it's just been some really poor timing in terms of, one, bad goaltending, and two, just like, when the defense is broken down, it's really broken down for the Flyers. I think they have too much talent defensively to keep that up. And so to me, this matchup is easily Ovechkin at the top tier of the center or of the wing position. Going down into this next year, like the 7 to 6.5K range, we're looking at Patrick Kane as like the probable, top play out of this range. I don't think that's much of a surprise. He's still shooting the puck a ton. The offense is obviously still going through Patrick Kane almost entirely. He and his new line mate, Brandon Saad, nearly broke the slate last time out against Anaheim. Saad going for 2 goals and 7 shots on goal, like 11.5 points from Brandon Saad. If you saw this coming, you should have bought that lottery ticket because you would be a billionaire right now. But Saad joins the Kane line, actually gets some power play run, and has 2 goals in a game, 7 shots, obviously. So one being an empty netter, but certainly never a bad thing to get 11.5 points out of a guy that's still below 5K and playing with Patrick Kane. So Brandon Saad, Kane could be a nice little stack, especially if people are kind of chasing the Rangers, success with like Zibanejad and Zuccarello. Getting the other side of that game could be a little bit more under the radar. And then diving deeper, same team, Alex DeBrincat, 6,600 for the Blackhawks. He's at 12 points in his first 9 games here. He's a great player, don't get me wrong, but he's not even on that first power play unit with Patrick Kane. So I don't really see a reason to pay up for him. I don't think that Jonathan Toews is such a game-breaking player. Like, that really makes DeBrincat someone that I want to have, because cheaper than DeBrincat here, we have Tarasenko, tough matchup, whatever. Jamie Benn playing with Sagan, obviously one of the best lines in hockey. And then the 2-headed monster of Panarin and Atkinson. I personally like all of these guys over DeBrincat myself. If I had to pick one, I'm actually kind of leaning towards Jamie Benn. And I don't usually play Benn, but this Columbus St. Louis game I think it has trouble written all over it for me. 2 teams that I really respect defensively. Columbus just getting Seth Jones back into the lineup. And then St. Louis being a team that I almost never want to target on offense just because of the way that, I think they're a really good shutdown defensive team and they have the talent to do so. So 6K, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, I think he's the top cash play here. Yet again, you're not going to find a guy getting as consistent of minutes as Nugent-Hopkins. And, he's playing alongside McDavid. You can't really do much better than that for 6K, getting 23 minutes alongside McDavid. And actually on this slate, given Edmonton's recent successes to begin the year at 5-on-5 and Washington's pretty abject failure at 5-on-5 to prevent dangerous scoring chances. Edmonton as a team has my fourth highest expected goals projection. I don't read these as gospel, especially this early in the year when we don't quite have the benchmark averages to compare it to, because I use an above average system, which basically takes a team's performance in each game and contextualizes it for the team's performance over the season. And so, if you do really well against the Buffalo Sabres of 2013-14 or 2017-18, because they were terrible then too, that doesn't get you as much credit as doing really well against Nashville from last year, because they're so good defensively. You get a lot more of a bonus. So, but with that said, Edmonton's put up some numbers on some pretty good teams to this point, and Washington has let up numbers to some pretty bad teams at this point. So when you let McDavid loose on this Washington roster, I think that Nugent Hopkins is in a great spot to capitalize on that. And, you'll probably be hearing from that Edmonton stack again later on in the show. Claude Giroux at 5,800 got some new line mates on Wednesday for Thursday night's game. Giroux's playing with Couturier and Travis Konecny. Couturier is 5K. I guess not a new line mate there, but Konecny is only 3,900. This is probably one of the top lines if they weren't going against Bergeron. So I'm almost kind of in a tricky spot of really wanting to get Konecny, just because I think he's such a great player. His shot floor has been super consistent. He's going to get you 2 points likely without a point or a goal. And there's obviously upside for more playing with Giroux there. And speaking of some of the value you mentioned earlier, with Tarasenko at 6.5, his likely line mate, Jaden Schwartz, is at 5,000. That's a super cheap stack, given, where these guys were even a couple of years ago. Just two of the better point producers in the NHL playing together. Tough matchup, but they're at home and they're priced down. So I certainly don't mind that in tournaments. We saw the GOAT, Vince Dunn, with them succeed on the power play last time out against the Winnipeg Jets, going for a goal, assist, 5 shots in only 15 minutes. So, a nice little 3-man stack there that gets you some upside at a relatively cheap price, given what we know about Tarasenko and just how dynamic he is. And then I mentioned Kovalchuk at 4,700, along with Saad at 4,800. Definitely guys who I think are more of riders than they are, cash lineup building blocks. But guys worthy of a mention nonetheless. Christian Fischer, fresh off a hat trick, goes from 3,300 up to 4,400. So another hat trick, and he'll probably be at 5,500. So can't wait to play him in 2 nights' time. Kidding, obviously. Yamamoto, back down at 4,300. So yeah, kind of the rub on him was against Nashville. McDavid played about 27 minutes, as silly as that sounds. And Yamamoto was only on the ice for 15 of those. Last game, McDavid played like 28 minutes, and Yamamoto's on the ice for 17 of them. So definite progress there for Yamamoto. He's been priced back down to 4,300, excuse me, there. And so, interestingly, he's blocked 5 shots in his last 2 games. So even though he's not been an offensive factor, he's still getting you some DFS, some DFS points. And when McDavid does find his stick for an easy tap in, or, by God, the second unit of the Edmonton power play scores, Yamamoto will be involved with that. So 4,300, I think, is a really nice price for McDavid and for Yamamoto, or I guess McDavid exposure. And then here's the guy I think a lot of people want to talk about, Tyler Pitlick here. Alex Radulov has already been confirmed out for Thursday's slate, which means that Tyler Pitlick, the hand-picked successor to Radulov on that first line, Jim Montgomery literally went on the record to say, hey, coach, why is Tyler Pitlick on the first line? He goes, well, I asked Tyler who they wanted up there, and he picked, I asked Tyler Seguin who he wanted on the line, and he picked Tyler. So that's why he's there. I'm gonna listen to Seguin, basically. That's literally what the coach said. And what I really like about Pitlick is that he's not one of these guys who is at a super high risk of being buried down the depth chart. Like, I think of Brett Ritchie of old when I hear that back in the Lindy Ruff era, when it would be, hey, Ritchie's playing with Seguin and Benn, jam him in. And then after the first period, Ritchie plays 4 minutes, and he gets buried on the fourth line for 2 minutes a period from there, and he ends the game with eight minutes and no points. Tyler Pitlick's a guy who's trusted defensively. If you look at his game logs, you'll see he plays about 15 minutes a night, even without the Seguin role. And so, assuming that everything goes right, I think you can pencil in Pitlick for 16 or so minutes, which is a really, really nice thing to factor in when you consider that he's also getting first power play run too. I took a gander into some of his rate stats just to see what sort of player he profiled as, because I didn't care too much when he was 2.9 playing with Seguin and Benn on the first power play and first line. But 4K, I think you have to start thinking about those sort of things a little bit. And interestingly, he actually profiles pretty well. He's got an iCorsi per 60 at all strengths, which is kind of like my crown jewel DFS metric, right about in the 13 range, which isn't great. Like an Ovechkin is up near the 22-ish range, and then I consider an elite shooter to be at the 18 to 20 mark, which is about where Tyler Seguin lives. But 13 is right about league average, and it's around guys like Claude Giroux, who aren't necessarily going to break a slate with 10 shots on goal, but they're likely to get you a handful of shots, especially when they play the minutes. So the Pitlick at 4K, I think, is a pretty awesome play still, and given the matchup between him and Konechny, I think they'll kind of get most of the ownership down here, given Konechny's first line role with Giroux and Couturier. But given the matchup for Konechny and for Pitlick, I think I'm siding with Pitlick here. I don't mind running a mini stack in cash games, but I think I'm going to lean more towards playing McDavid and Pitlick together rather than going, maybe Seguin and Konechny or something, just because I like what Pitlick allows me to do with the rest of my team. And obviously you can play both if you want to jam in 2 stud centers, maybe a Crosby and a McDavid or something. You can definitely fit Pitlick and Konechny in as kind of cash game, strong values at the wing position. Going a little bit cheaper, DJ's boy, Vinny Hinostroza, uh, initially my boy, and then DJ, I think's played him the last like 3 slates. So, kudos to him. The guy keeps producing. What I really like about him is his shot rate is, sky high. Did not expect to come in the year saying that about Vinny Hinostroza, but one of the better iCourse per 60s in the entire NHL. I believe last time I checked, it sits right up about in the 18 range. Um, let's see. Okay, yeah, it's fallen back down to the 17 range, right outside the elite tier. The guy's going to play some minutes, so just a solid 3.4 punt in a really good matchup against a Vancouver team that, like I said earlier, is very shorthanded. And then looking through the rest of the punt tier at wing, I'm not really seeing anyone I like. Lawson Crouse is interesting. However, he's not getting any power play time. And for me, I'm just never going to play a guy when he doesn't get power play time. Like, it's just, there's too much that can go wrong in a game that, this is the Kapanen debate kind of all over again. Like, Crouse is a relatively good player. He's put up, good numbers playing on that first line, with last game being his first game without multiple shots in 6 games, playing 15 minutes. But I'm just not going to do it, even in a good matchup. All these other factors can be in his favor, but the lack of power play time just sends me cowering into the corner with my tail between my legs. And all right, a quick look at some defensemen. I'm actually going to start defense with a really cheap defenseman who I don't think a lot of people have made a lot of time for, in Rasmus Anderson. The guy is 2,900 for the Calgary Flames. Sorry, 2,700 for the Flames. And going against Pittsburgh, I immediately came into the slate. I'm playing Mark Giordano, because of the way that Pittsburgh operates. Like, they don't care if they are changing chances. But what they're going to do is they're going to cycle, they're going to get the puck on net, and, they're going to give up offense, sure, but they're also going to give up, a ton of block shots, a ton of just offensive opportunities and defensive opportunities to pick up fantasy points. And so I wanted to get a defenseman in there from this Calgary game. And so looking through, some of these prices, I'm like, Giordano, like 5.7, like fine. And then Noah Hanifin kind of interested me at 3,100. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. I thought Hanifin was on the power play. Lo and behold, this Rasmus Anderson fella jumped onto the second unit last game with Michael Backlund. And Rasmus Anderson is really, really good, guys. He's one of the Flames' one of the top defensive prospects in the entire NHL. He's got a perfect skill set for daily fantasy. He moves the puck well. In reading scouting reports, he's very similar to a Vince Dunn type, where like his skating is great. He's very fluid with the puck. He's gonna be one of their best, up ice movers with it. But for Anderson last game, he played 21 minutes. He actually led the team in 5-on-5 ice time. In a game that they were trailing, so they definitely view him as like an offensive spark plug for them, which is an awesome thing to see from a guy so young, so new to the NHL, but with so much talent. Those sort of minutes just don't come around all that often for guys in the 2,700 range, and he's just so good. Looking at his shot numbers, he's right at about the 11 to 12 iCorsi per 60 mark, which for a defenseman is, it's not Burnsian, but it's certainly good enough. Looking at it from the perspective of like, hey, this guy, is going to get the puck on net. He's going to be involved offensively. And so, to me, I'm actually kind of coming into this, assuming we don't get any like coach speak that like, oh, well, Anderson was just on the power play because XYZ reason, because he was firmly in a role all game on that second unit. And I really like the matchup with Pittsburgh again, like I said, and you get some exposure to Michael Backlund, who is Calgary's best center by far. So assuming that you're starting lineups there, that leaves some room up top for a defenseman. John Carlson has just been ridiculous to start the season. He's already got 5 goals in 8 games with 13 points. I certainly am not going to try and talk you out of that. A fun game stack with Edmonton could be in order, playing Carlson and Ovechkin. Letang, 6,500, a fun game stack with Anderson, whoever else you want, play Letang with Crosby, just kind of smashing some of that value. But those two to me are the clear top plays. John Klingberg is also very much in play. I worry a bit more about his floor stats than the two studs here. But to me, I'm not going to Seth Jones until he gets that first power play unit back. He did come in getting 27 minutes, so he's certainly not being eased back into action. But, Petrie, Subban, Ryan Suter's up here in price in the 6K range. Giordano, like I mentioned, I'm not really interested in anyone until we get back down to Gostisbehere at 5,500 and Matt Dumba at 5,200. Clefbaum at 5,400 is obviously a very strong play as well. Putting up 8 shots was blocks last game after I made him kind of my gold star lock of the night. So that was certainly nice to see. But he's well deserving of this price jump to 5,400 now. So kudos to DraftKings for pricing the guy reasonably. But Matt Dumba here, 5,200. I think that he's just one of those very few defensemen who can absolutely change a game from the point. He has this uncanny ability to just spark a rush at the right time to make a pinch at the blue line that turns into like a 3-on-1 opportunity somehow. He's just really, really explosive. And I think that he should be in like the high 5s. And so LA is not very good, guys. Don't let me be the one to, convince you that Minnesota is the best team in the world. But I think Minnesota is far and away a better team than LA. And Dumba has free reign all over the ice. So I really like him here. Along Roman Josi, 5,100, just too cheap. Come on, guys. Roman Josi should not be 5,100. And so with that in mind, I really don't see a reason to play anyone else down here. I'm not even that big on Vince Dunn at 4,600. As I mentioned earlier, I think that the Columbus-St. Louis game could be a bit of a snoozer, and the minutes for Dunn aren't quite high enough to where I'm really all that interested. An interesting development out of Buffalo diving down to this this high 3s range, where I think it's a pretty interesting decision, is that Dahlin's playing the first power play with Eichel, Skinner, Pominville, and Casey Middlestat. Dahlin's playing 20 minutes a night now. We know he's got, some awesome offensive talent and just an all-around solid player. Dahlin's not going to be a guy who plays, 12 minutes in a game. That's just not the way he's going to be used in Buffalo. So you're really getting in on the ground floor of Dahlin at 3,700. So I think he's another very reasonable cash play at the defense position. Um, and I think he's a little bit safer than Matt Grzelcyk at 3,800. We know that I really like Grzelcyk. He's not much of a shooter, but he's playing on that first power play, and that's certainly one of the best spots for any defenseman playing first power play shotgun with the Boston one line. And then the last guy at defense I'm considering is Jared Spurgeon, 3,600. Um, not necessarily as explosive as Matt Dumba is, but I think that he's got a lot more to offer than like the floor numbers he's put up so far this season. The minutes are still there for Spurgeon, playing about 22 minutes a night, and 3,600 I think is about as low as you're going to see Spurgeon go. But yeah, I think I kind of jammed it home with my lead into the defense position, but this is really going to be a Rasmus Andersson night for me. Like, these are the sort of opportunities that don't come around often. We saw it with guys like Henry Jokijaru. Like, when they get an opportunity and run with it, um, DraftKings adjusts quick. I can't promise you like the FanDuel look will be exactly the same. It's late at night. I don't really want to pull it up to go through it, but these are the sort of opportunities that I think you just kind of, don't look a gift horse in the mouth and just kind of, take advantage of the news. Like I promise you, Anderson will be super low owned in this great matchup with Pittsburgh, where he could do a lot of damage. So, with all that said, I'm just going to wrap it up with a couple of stacks that I really like, and then I'm going to guarantee a couple goals. So I hinted at it earlier, but as one of the late hammers, Edmonton won, like McDavid, Nugent Hopkins, and Yamamoto. Throwing Clefbaum there for the four-man stack if you wish. But I really like getting McDavid with Yamamoto here. We saw, two relatively down games from Yamamoto in which he basically met value. I mean, he put up 2 DK points in both games without even picking up an assist. So people might be jumping off of him for that reason, but I think that McDavid's going to pick it up at 5-5 sooner rather than later, and I don't want to miss out on that. So I really like the McDavid line here in tournaments. Even if he's relatively high owned, I think that Yamamoto will be left off of a lot of those stacks based on his lack of performance. But Yamamoto was one of the most explosive players maybe we've ever seen in WHL. Um, just looking up some of his stats real quick because as we've never really seen a guy who's 5'7", light up the any Canadian Junior League like that and not immediately kind of get like NHL backlash for being too small or whatever. Obviously, Yamamoto's come in. Got demoted last year, but came in this year, and really, he's one of the hardest workers out on the ice. He doesn't look overmatched. When you watch him play out there with McDavid, so just really impressive stuff from Yamamoto. So I like getting in on him when people might be starting to sour on his relatively lackluster 2-game audition so far with McDavid. And then secondly, a little bit cheaper, but I think another really low owned stack that you can uh, get in on now is the Philly one stack. I don't feel great about it in cash games, obviously, because I project them to match up with that Bergeron line and have their hands full there. Um, but assuming McAvoy's out, like this Boston blue line is not all that great. And, that kind of leads me to believe that even with a tough forward matchup, the defense behind it, like, I don't think Chara's that scary anymore. And so getting Giroux, Couturier, Konechny, and Gossespierre at their current prices just feels like stealing. You can fit in basically any high price stack you want with those four or even three of those guys. And so that's a really good spot, I think, that will go overlooked, despite Philly being only a moderate underdog here at plus 150. Then some guaranteed goals. I'm going to start things off with Tyler Pitlick. Um, I mentioned him in some of his stats earlier. I just think that he's a really, really safe play. Um, and that with that safety comes the upside of being kind of glued to Sagan and Benn and being, I guess one of their favorite players to play with. So it was nice to see him score last time out, but I think this time, he's going to get some more offensive looks. And against Anaheim, they should have the puck in the offensive zone a lot. So I like Pitlick to get a greasy one again on Thursday night. That leaves me about 7K. And I would be remiss if I did not use that money on one Mr. John Carlson, 6,800. Um, it's just one of those things where if Ovechkin starts to get hot, teams definitely start shading to him even more than they normally do, which Carlson more wide open for his awesome one timer as well. And, people might be looking at his start saying it's unsustainable. But, you know, I don't think anything about the Capitals is unsustainable given what they did last year with, pretty poor numbers as well. Um, pretty poor underlying numbers, I should say. And the talent that they have on the ice at all times going against this Edmonton team should be another game full of fireworks. Hopefully, we have a game like Tuesday night that, again, I consider was kind of the game of the year. So, should be another fun one in store there. So, all right. Thank you all for listening. If you haven't, be sure to go back and listen to the Justition portion of the show because that was some really good stuff, courtesy of DJ and Nick from Justition. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Morningscape Pod, and be sure to follow Justition at just. Actually, let me double check that. At Justition. Didn't want to be giving out the wrong Twitter handle. All their links will be in the description, as well as updates to come later on when the t-shirts are actually available. But we appreciate you guys kind of showing your support thus far. We put out a poll saying, like, would you buy a shirt? And we got way more people than we expected saying yes. And so we appreciate your input there. And we use that feedback to kind of take a guesstimate on like what sort of sizing we'll need, because don't want to make overly broad generalizations about our listeners. So we've crunched the numbers, gotten to a good proportion that will work for us, and we'll get these shirts in production. And I guess a last note, I'm aware that there's something going on with the sim that is, it's not necessarily ruining it, but it's taking something a little bit off in the background and kind of magnifying it. So when you look at the frequency and pickle scores, again, if you're not familiar with any of this, be sure to check out our website, morningskapepod.com/the-sim. It's a free tool to use. But there is something going on in the background that's kind of making it a bug, and the frequency and pickle scores are not working as we would expect them to. So for now, if you're looking to get some sim takes, just look at the magnitude. It's a bit more of a GPP oriented look, but in general, you're looking for guys that'll score the most points, and magnitude is when a guy scores points, here's how many points he scores, basically. So nothing too flashy there, but just wanted to make sure you guys are aware that we're working on it. And we'll try and get that fixed as soon as possible. But everything else should be in working order on the sim, so be sure to check that out for the slate. All right. Thank you for listening to me drone on about hockey for probably way too long. So be sure to yell at me in the group me if you didn't like it, or on Twitter. And as always, thank you for listening. So from Doug, from DJ, from myself, have a good slate, everybody, and we will see ya.